I am so pleased to welcome our Conservancy steward, Rachel Hewitt. She's a certified master naturalist and an Arizona State University graduate. She has a Bachelor's of Science degree in conservation biology and ecological sustainability and a Master's of Science degree in biomimicry. She serves in the military as a logistics officer with the Arizona Army National Guard, currently totaling 23 years of service. Thank you for your service, Rachel. I mean, when you see how young she is, you won't believe the amount of accomplishment she has. Today, she's going to be talking about the champions, lesser known species of the Sonoran Desert, and what we humans can learn from them in solving our own everyday challenges. Rachel's going to use a little different format for her questions, and so I'll let her tell you all about it. But everyone, please welcome Rachel Hewitt.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate that. Let me go ahead and get my started here. So first and foremost, thank you so much for inviting me to do this. This is such a treat to be able to do this rather than my full-time work. As Max mentioned, I am in the National Guard as a logistics officer, and that takes up pretty much 70% of my time. 20% I'm able to hang out with my family. And then the rest of the time I dedicate to try to get at all the things that bring me such fulfillment, such as being a steward here in the preserve, being a master naturalist, and just being out in nature, being that lifelong learner. So the presentation that I have for you today, I've entitled it The Champions, Lesser Known Species of the Sonoran Desert. Some of you may have already seen these. You may know more about them than I'm going to present. And I'm going to try to give it a little bit of a different angle, bringing in my experience, my knowledge on biomimicry. And I'll explain what that is a little bit later. Instead of holding all your questions to the end, I do want to go ahead and honor the chat. If you'd rather have that held up towards the end, if you could type your question in the chat. I do not mind being interrupted either. If there's something that you would like to interject, for example, I am totally good with that. I will keep a note on the time though. If there is a whole lot of conversation, which is totally awesome, at the same time, I may say, okay, I think we need to go ahead and move on. I'd really like to get through everything, and then by all means have discussion points when we've got that space to do that. So again, thank you for allowing me to take time out of your day and being able to present this presentation to you today. I know that you've heard of biomimicry before. There's been another gentleman, which I'm so sorry, his name is escaping me at the moment, that did have a lunch and learn on that very topic. So hopefully I can continue that meme and keep that lens going here. So just an overview of this presentation. In that approach, the biomimicry approach, I'm going to go ahead and utilize some of those tenets. So we're going to look at the operating conditions. And those are things like, what do things that live in the desert, what do they have to endure? Along with life's principles, these are the deep patterns that they exist in all species, no matter if you're a plant, mammal, if you're a microbe. Everything has some kind of exhibition of these principles in order for them to be enduring today. And then most importantly, how can we look at some of the adaptations of the Arizona plants and animals that you may or may not be familiar with, and again, adding in that biomimicry lens. So what is biomimicry? Here is a very direct explanation. It's learning from and then emulating the natural forms, processes, and ecosystems in order to create more sustainable designs. In other words, how to create conditions conducive to life on Earth. So in nature, we can see forms. Those can be things like a physical structure, things that can inform the way we design things, for example. It could mean a process, how we actually put things together. Is there a way to do that that uses maybe less energy, less like man-made materials? Is there a more readily available resource in order to carry out that process? And then the most complex of that would be the ecosystem. How could we have our cities function like the way a forest functions, for example? So all of that, it's a science, it's a design principle, and it's all about having this new perspective to living. How can we have this catalyst for a transformative culture that creates conditions conducive to life? So the operating conditions. When I mentioned that, these are the contexts that all of life on Earth has to persist in order to endure. Here's just a couple fun photos. I am a huge fan of anything dealing with space science, so you'll see that in a couple other aspects of the presentation. So in the upper left, that is sunlight. All life on Earth exists because we're able to utilize that energy that comes from the sun. The distance from the sun is also very important. We have the most water on this planet than any other planet, and we exist in this zone where there's just enough radiation that we get exposed to by the sun in order to live. It's not too hot, not too cold, just right. It's called the Goldilocks Zone. Below that, I put a picture of the coral. So that is dealing with the like gravity and pressure, and also obviously water. Everything exists on Earth that's able to utilize water. There is life at the bottom of the ocean in these deep sea thermal vents where it's like over 100 degrees. Life is able to persist there because of the water. And then on the right-hand side, that's just gravity. If we didn't have gravity the way that we do on Earth, rainfall would be different. The way our bones are structured would be different. Everything would be different if we weren't used to the amount of gravity that's persisting on our planet as it does. So those are the operating conditions, those things that we all are subject to, and they may change a little bit, but things that exist today exist the way they do because of those. And here's the life's principles. So in biomimicry, there are 23 total principles. I just put the main ones on here and want to go through them very briefly with you. So all of the creatures that you see in the desert, all of the creatures across every species, they all exhibit a pattern in following these life's principles. These are the deep patterns that persist, that allow all organisms to exist the way that they do. You can find it, like I said, anywhere from a microbe to a mammal to a plant, even us. So here are those 6. They're be resource efficient with material and energy, adapting to changing conditions, evolve to survive, using life-friendly chemistry, integrate development with growth, and be locally attuned and responsive. So that's very broad. Let me go into each of those just to give a brief overview. So evolving to survive, what that's talking about is that all life on this planet has a blueprint, and that's the DNA. So that's our organized plan for design that's found throughout all life. And what is able to adapt exists today, and what hasn't been able to adapt is a fossil. So any alterations to DNA by selective pressures, whether those are things like biotic, like a predation pressure, or abiotic, if there's a change in the environment, like a change in temperature or the radiation, all life is subject to those pressures, and it does show up in DNA. And what you see today is that adaptation to be able to survive. Next here, adapting to changing conditions. So this one, I like to use the scenery there of a forest fire. Although that may look very destructive, there are organisms that rely on fire in order to persist. So in this particular example, there is a jack pine cone forest that's shown, and the seeds of the cones actually rely on that high temperature to release their seeds. So being able to live in these changing conditions, which in our desert, as you all know, Temperature variations are amazing. No matter what time of year it is, it seems like you have to be able to do this 30 to 40 degree temperature swing. That's what adapting to changing conditions is all about. Being locally attuned and responsive, this is about being able to persist in this particular environment. And then when there's these periodic changes or predictable things like tidal waves, tidal poles, how do we respond to that? And as organisms, can you use that as a feedback loop? Is there something that you can obtain or you can benefit from if you understand the cyclic processes? So the example I love to give is this coral. Not a desert example, but this particular coral in the Pacific Ocean, it relies upon moonlight. And at a particular time of the year, when there's a full moon, it releases its eggs. So it's kind of amazing to me that an organism, a creature that's existing in the ambient temperature and pressure of the ocean, it's relying on the light of the moon as a signal, as a cyclic process to release its eggs, and the next generation is going to come about. I'm always fascinated by that example. Integrating development with growth. I like using our actual human bones for this example of this life principle. So what this is about is that as you grow, you're making space within your original structure to allow that growth to happen. And it's kind of like a nested component design. So with human bones on the very left in that image, there's a model, you could think of that as like an infant bone. And then as time goes on, your bones actually stretch like that. There's a particular area where spaces are made and cells expand. I won't go too deep into that biology, but that is how our bones expand and grow into the adult size length. And it's always been a bone, but again, there's been those spaces that have been afforded to allow that growth to happen, and it continues to still be a bone. Being resource efficient with your material and energy. So all living systems require energy to exist. And if you can expound upon what's readily available to you, then you're being efficient and you're solving many things with this one elegant design. So in kind of an abstract example, the picture you see here, it's a nebula that's in the Serpens constellation. It's called the Pillars of Creation. And I'm absolutely fascinated by that. And a nebula is a collection of dust, and it could be minerals and everything coming together to make things like a planet. So we're all subject to losing energy by things becoming less complex, and then on the other side becoming more complex, like us today as a human being. And so I like giving that image as an example where everything's coming together very slowly. There isn't any additional energy in that system to bring all of those molecules and dust together, yet it produces something like a planet. And for life-friendly chemistry, this is about doing chemistry in water. When we think of chemistry, a lot of times it's things that maybe a company such as like Merck makes a particular chemical, or are like Palmolive stuff, like dish soap, like there's a factory somewhere and they're the ones that do all the chemistry and put these things together to make things that we use in our built environment. So in the natural world, chemistry definitely exists, but a lot of times, most often it happens in water. It doesn't require a lot of temperature to create what we're looking for, like as a structure. And it doesn't require anything that's like a waste or like a toxic output of the system. So it's building selectively with a small set of elements that are readily available and producing things, as in this example here of bioluminescence. So in this photo here, I love these creatures. They're in New Zealand. They're called cave worms or glowworms. And so these adults that you see, those strings, they're actually strings of saliva from the adult worm's mouth. And they let that down, and it's almost like a fishing pole for insects. And the insects are attracted by the light. And the light is produced by those adult glowworms in their bodies. And It doesn't require heat. It doesn't require anything additional. They're doing all of that chemistry within their bodies. And so it's like life friendly. And they do that in order to attract their prey. So that's a brief overview of these amazing life principles that all life exhibits. And so now bringing it back to our preserve, how can you give me a desert example? And I love how the cardinal is cocking his head just to do this little prompt. So here's some native creatures that I am sure many of us are familiar with. You may have even seen them many times. I've had bark scorpions in my house. I love the Palo Verde beetle. They're huge, they're a little ominous, but they're also amazing. Those giant antennae are able to detect the monsoons, and then they fly out at night to find their mates. The jackrabbit has those giant ears as a means to cool its body. It has many veins circulating throughout those ears, and so there's some like convective cooling happening there. Does anybody else that's present here, is there any other comments that you might have on adaptations that you might know about these common native creatures?
Rachel, I was wondering, this is Max, how does the Palo Verde beetle use its antenna? You said they detect the monsoon, and so do they hide or do they go to the water?
Yes, so I kind of combined a couple different things there. So they're called the Palo Verde beetle because the giant grub, which is it's like 2 to 3 inches long, it loves to chomp on the Palo Verde roots. And then when it becomes an adult, it's still underground, but when the monsoons come, those antennae can detect the rain. And then others are also in that same boat. So then they emerge, and then they use them to find each other in the night, basically. Like you can find them if you have a pool and the monsoons that are just happening, you might find 1 or 2 if you leave a light on that are kind of looking for their mate in the night.
Interesting, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Max. Anyone else?
This is Ricky Ray. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. You did not comment on the Gila Monster, which happens to be one of my favorite little creatures. What can you tell me that I don't know, which is probably much?
So I honestly was hoping I probably would get something else on the line. The main thing I would say is its ability to maintain moisture, that it can persist for a very long time with very little prey items, and it's still able to exist in our varying climate here in the desert.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I wish I had something else on the Gila Monster, but I would say, I guess the only thing that comes to mind is that the poison saliva that it has, that is a way for it to be able to digest its prey, and it's also something that would deter anybody with that bright orange color, any type of predation happening upon itself. Like if you eat me, there's a possibility you're going to get bit and it's not going to turn out well for you.
Hi, this is Yvonne. I have something fascinating about the Gila Monster. They love tortoise eggs. And when tortoises lay their eggs, there's like a maligulus that comes out also, so that when the eggs are landing, they don't break. And the tortoise or the Gila Monster is very in tune with the smell of that. So they know when a tortoise is laying the eggs by the smell that maligulus has, and then they can come in and find the nest where those eggs are. So often you'll see a Gila Monster without any digits on feet because the tortoise protecting their eggs has bit off their toe. The end.
Wow, thank you, Yvonne. That is amazing. So if you see a Gila Monster without toes, now you know who chomped them off. That is fascinating. Thank you. So here we go. I am going to, oops, let me go back here, start with there's 6 champions that I have to share with you. And on this journey, I'm gonna look at these desert creatures through 3 different specific lenses: their natural history, the biological function that I have chosen to highlight with them, and then the mechanism and the strategy. How is it that they carry out that biological function? So this on the screen here, it's called, it's a Veromesser pergandi. It's known as the desert harvester ant. It's also called the black harvester ant. It's found in both the Mojave and Sonoran deserts. Something that's a bit fascinating about this ant is that it is polymorphic, meaning that there are different body sizes throughout all the different individuals in the colony. There's 5 different variants in their body size, 3 to 7 millimeters. And as you can imagine, that kind of explains the different types of work that they do. So the larger ones, for example, they may move and transport materials that are heavier if they're more towards that 7 millimeter size. Either way, they kind of do share the load as that teamwork that we often see exhibited in an ant colony. They do harvest food all year long. So one thing that I find very fascinating about these ants is that they're dark, they're black, and they're in the desert. It's just one of those things where, you know, we don't know everything. I don't know everything, and just trying to understand how, as a biologist even, how is it that these creatures persist? And you would think that they're absorbing all of this, you know, UV energy because they're that dark color, but they are kind of shiny. They have these hairs that you see, so maybe that has something to do with it. But just a little tidbit there, something that I'm even fascinated with, and I don't know what the answer is, why they're not a lighter color, for example, even though they're in the desert. So the biological function that I wanted to highlight here is how they gather food and energy. So as a harvester ant, they do gather seeds. They can also harvest different fruits and even insects. They're a bit opportunistic in that light, but in particular about this species, there's these long hairs that you see that come from the underside of their head. And all those hairs make up this structure called a samophore. And what that basically means is a basket. So these hairs, they're not found in very many other species. And from what we understand from all different ant biologists that study these creatures, is that structure, that basket structure, functions to help with efficient transport of their either seeds that they're collecting or sand. So they, in those deserts, like I mentioned, where they live, those hairs like kind of act like a shovel almost, and they can help move sand out of the way of the opening of their colony, or it can help transport seeds. So the mechanism and strategy, how they carry out gathering their food, is utilizing this structure, this samophore, that acts like a basket, and it helps them harvest or transport materials. And if you are into ants, this photo is from AntWeb. If you go to antweb.com, anything you would like to know and fascinating, zoomed in, beautiful photos are on there. Next, I have the blister beetle. So this particular insect, the photo on the right, the first time I ever saw one was at the Hassayampa River Preserve. I had ventured out there several times as part of my Master Naturalist chapter to do butterfly monitoring. And I saw that one on the right, and I'm like, oh, you're very interesting. I had never seen one before, and I didn't mess with it too much. And I'm really glad that I didn't, because I didn't know what it was. So the blister beetle, Lyta magister, the magister part just means that it's kind of like magnificent. It's one of the larger of this species. There's many different kinds or species. There are many different colors, but this one right here I have, it is definitely in the preserve and also throughout our desert. So the function that I wanted to look at was protecting itself from biotic threats or things that could like eat it or maybe kill it or smash it, like a human. If this lands on you, maybe you might be nervous and try to flick it away. But after learning about its mechanism, how it protects itself, you may want to think twice about that. So this photo here, this is from an ASU site called Ask a Biologist. you can type in a question there and get a response back from a number of different biologists. So what's happening here is that the beetle is being squeezed just a tiny bit, and you'll see that there is yellow droplets forming along the joints. And so what that is it's blood or hemolymph. This is a defense mechanism the beetle uses to deter something from eating it or chomping on it, or at least thinking twice if that's already happened. So in the blood of this insect, or the hemolymph, there's a chemical called Cantharidin, and that is like a blistering agent. So if this gets on your skin because you smashed it, or with like a mammal, if they're venturing out and trying to find insects to eat, if it gets squeezed or disturbed at all, that's going to come out of these joints, which is kind of prolific in a way that there's this particular hole, so to speak, where the lymph is going to squeeze out of. And if that gets on our skin, if it gets on any kind of like mucus surface on a mammal, it is going to cause a lot of irritation and huge blistering. So that is how it is going to protect itself. In some cases, I have read if in certain areas, because this beetle, it can persist throughout California all the way to Florida. And if you haven't looked through your like alfalfa or hay harvest very well, if a lot of these are in there and you feed that hay and alfalfa to your livestock, it can potentially be very harmful, even fatal, because again, it is a blistering agent. It could cause a lot of damage to their vital organs. So I'm glad I didn't pick up that one in the Hassayampa River Preserve, and I am also fascinated to learn that that is an adaptation this beetle has to avoid predation. And besides that, it's got that bright orange coloring on a lot of its exoskeleton. So usually that is a signal to other creatures, you better leave me alone, or you're going to regret taking a bite out of me. So moving on to a creature that maybe is a little more cuddly, so to speak. I don't know if anyone here on the line, I believe Max, you told me you did see these before. So this is, to me, a very unassuming guest that you would see in the desert. And they're a very tropical looking type creature to me. They almost remind me of lemurs. The Kodamundi, specifically the Nassau Norika. So this mammal, it does exist in Arizona all the way down to Argentina. And it's, as you see, it's very furry. It looks kind of like a raccoon. There is a native tribe in Southern America called the Tupen. And the word for Kodamundi comes from their language. It combines the words for nose and belt. So their nose is this very prolific structure. And then their tails have these rings on it. And Kodamundi, I also believe, means a lone member, although they also exist in bands. It's just a very fascinating creature to see in the desert. Their tails can be up to like 27 inches long. They also have pads on their feet like a bear, and they got this amazing nose structure that I want to talk more about in this next picture here. So on the upper right, the Kodamundi is kind of like mid-step, and you can see that big plump pad on the bottom of its foot. So very much like a bear or even a human, they walk very flat-footed. They've got these very long claws that, to me, they totally remind me of a bear as well. In the desert here, we've got the white-nosed Kodamundi, that particular species that I mentioned. And this nose is so amazing. So it's this very flexible structure. It kind of ends in a turned up point. What is really amazing about it is that it can move in 60 degrees in any direction. And it utilizes that in this biological function to gather its food. So it mainly preys on insects. It'll also eat fruits. And it uses that nose along with claws to like dig into the desert, the crust, to turn over rocks, to look in crevices for insects. And I do have the short little clip of what they sound like. If you have never come across one, I'm still waiting for that magical moment to happen for me. They I've listened to a couple recordings and they sound kind of like, almost like birds chirping. And this particular sound clip, it's mainly of like them sniffing through the desert crust. And then there's a couple chirps you'll hear that are squeals. It's actually the Kodamundi. So I'm just going to pause talking for a moment so we can listen to that. Just try to imagine this flexible structure with all these muscles and all these sensory receptors as it's looking through rocks and shuffling through maybe crusty soil, trying to find some grasshoppers, maybe a larva. So these creatures, they normally are going to be found traveling in bands, and you may see adults with a few young that are just unbelievably adorable. If you do come across them, I think that would be a magical moment. The particular photos that I have displayed here, I'll give credit to how I found them online near the Colossal Cave region of Tucson. So I've also read that they are in Cochise County. So if you do happen to see them, definitely snap a photo to share with the rest of the stewards. I think it's just very unique to see such a subtropical animal living in this desert to semi-desert region.
Hi, Rachel, it's Yvonne again. Just to let you know,
Yeah.
that living over in the Desert Highlands area over by Pinnacle Peak. I had one of the residents send me a picture because I was thinking maybe it was a raccoon, but it was definitely a quaddy. And I have seen them in the superstitions. So they're kind of local. I just took a bird down to Liberty Wildlife the other day, and they have one that they just rescued too. So still
Amazing.
In this area. Yeah, it's really cool. And actually Southwest Wildlife every so often will end up getting a baby too. So kind of fun.
Oh my gosh. I think that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, this desert mammal, just think of like how adapted it is, how versatile, all these different habitats that it can exist in. There's definitely lessons to be learned there, like especially as us, we as humans persist in every biome. So that's incredible that they're closer than I thought they were. So I'm trying to ensure I cover a whole lot of different variety. So we've seen some insects, a mammal. I have to feature a reptile. This is the Mexican vine snake, and this very slender creature, Oxybellus anneus. You may not see it hardly at all, like close by here, but it is mainly found in southern Arizona. Also in the Madrean parts of Cochise County. So also in canyons, you're going to find this snake where there are those like juniper trees and other shrubs or bushes where it can exist and hunt its favorite prey of lizards. So it does grow up to just a little over 6 feet long, and it does have this very unique long snout, so to speak. That structure in the front that almost goes to a tip, unlike many other snakes. It's only mildly venomous to humans. It's got these very small rear fangs, which it uses to ensure to capture that prey and keep it going towards the stomach. And it has brown coloring on the top, yellow on the bottom, kind of lending to its camouflage while it's in trees. And again, it's only mildly venomous to humans. I didn't find anywhere where there was ever any kind of fatal incident if you happen to disturb it or handle it in a way that it felt the need to bite. So it does have that really slender structure. It grows to over 6 feet long, and it can open its mouth really wide to do like a defensive posture. Like this picture right here, if I was taking a walk on a trail in southern Arizona, I think I would probably back up if I saw a mouth like that warning me. Although it is very, like, to me, almost like fragile in a way, and it mainly hunts lizards. It's opportunistic though. It'll eat whatever it can come across, whether that's frogs, birds, other insects, maybe even small rodents. So it uses that camouflage to sneak up on prey, and then also the quick movements that it has and those rear fangs to keep a hold of it. And I have seen these on a trip I was on as part of my master's program in Costa Rica, and I was absolutely amazed how fast these things can move. I'm sure it's because they're very light, and that long, snake-like structure that they have. It was incredible to see how fast it would dart away once it realized it was noticed. And when it's in the trees, it totally mimics the swaying of a vine or a branch. It is very difficult to detect these things if they're in the trees, given that their whole mechanism and strategy is to blend in order to sneak up on its favorite prey, like those lizards. So moving on into some plants, I figured it would be a fun thing to mention a psychedelic that's not very well known, or at least maybe for its Native American use. So this is Lophophora williamsii. As you can see, this is a very beautiful ornamental cactus. If it had not been harvested to near extinction, and then just the fact that it does have those particular characteristics, it seems to me this would have a huge market for ornamental plants. It's got these beautiful flowers, and this is very resilient to our desert habitat. So just to expand on where these are found, it does grow mainly throughout the Chihuahuan Desert and South Texas. It does exist on either side of the Rio Grande, and as you can see here, the structure it has are like button-like, so that's why it's called the mezcal button. Sometimes you'll only see that round shape barely below the surface of the soil, depending upon the type of year or time of year it is, or how much water has been available to it. And it often exists in these clusters. It is completely illegal in all 50 states, just because of its characteristics that it does have. It's a Schedule I drug. The only members of society that are able to legally transport, harvest, or use this plant are members of the Native American Church. So the reason for that is part of that culture utilizes a chemical found in the cactus. It's an alkaloid called mescaline. And the purpose in the church for using that is mostly for a healing treatment. It is not purposely used just to like have a hallucination or have some kind of high. That's definitely not the original purpose for it. It's extremely medicinal, from treating skin wounds, snake bites, for utilizing a piece of the button to treat a toothache. And when it is dried, that is when, as a community in the Native American Church, that some would be used for somebody who needed healing. And I think what's unique about that is that compared to medicinal uses in our modern culture, as you would call it, is that the healing is a community event. It's not just, oh, I have a muscle ache, go take your ibuprofen, go figure it out, carry on your day. In this particular instance, it's about an introspective look on what is hurting you, and then the whole community is there in the Native American Church when you're using this. So it's this community healing, along with you, the individual, ingesting something that allows that to happen. I just found that very fascinating. I wanted to honor that there are medicines in the desert that, given that they, like this one here, it has been placed on the vulnerable list of the IUCN's endangered species list. Only this particular culture can use it. Yet there is this lesson here to be learned on what it offers. So that's not why the cactus has this chemical in it. So back to the biological functions, why would this alkaloid exist in this cactus? Well, this cactus can take 10 to 20 years to develop to maturity. And again, living in the desert, there's not a lot of water, so it's got to develop a way to protect itself as it's taking all those years to mature and persist. So this particular alkaloid, as you can imagine, it's a way to deter other creatures from eating it. I have no idea what that would be like for a mammal to ingest it and have a hallucination. I'm sure that would definitely deter it from ever eating these again, but it is a way to protect against that kind of biotic threat from something eating it. And another cool adaptation that it has is the reason why the button shape, why it's called that, is that it can actually retract down into the soil. Its taproot contracts. And it does that in order to save itself from all that UV exposure and the loss of, preventing the loss of moisture. And so it can recede down to where you can just see it looks like almost like a coin that was kind of pressed into the soil crust. And then after it rains again, it'll pop up again. And as it's able to utilize all that obtained moisture and be this structure, and those beautiful flowers, they persist throughout the summer. But again, it's completely legal in all 50 states, only legal for the Native American Church to use, yet it has these very unique adaptations to persist and enable it to reach that maturity over almost 2 decades. This next plant here, it's the last creature I have to show you, organism. It is called the scorpion weed, Facilia cranolata. What I really like about this, why I want to show it to you, is the fact that it's this tiny purple, like to violet flower, and it's only 1 centimeter across. Anytime I see a flower in the desert, my husband knows if we take a hike, it may take us an hour to go half a mile because I have to take a picture of everything and go identify it later. And this particular plant, we got married in a very desert setting, and I actually used that as a bouquet. And at the time, I had no idea that it had these particular properties that I'm going to explain to you. I just thought it's just another beautiful desert plant. It's native. By all means, this is the perfect bouquet for me. So here's some really pretty zoomed in photos of the scorpion weed. So this persists all throughout our desert here. It's native to North and South America. It's a member of the genus Helitropium. So a heliotrope is a type of plant that follows the sun across the sky, like sunflowers. You'll find that they're leaning one way or the other, depending upon the position of the sun. And so it does that as well. I've seen this flower only in spring. I don't know if anybody's seen it any other time of year. It does have both annual and perennial types or species, but I usually only see it in March or April. And the reason it's called scorpion weed is that bottom right photo, that structure that the flowers grow on, it has, to me, it looks like a fern or a frond type structure, and it grows up into like this circle, and that looks like a curled up scorpion tail. So when you discover a plant, you get to name it however you want. And that particular person was like scorpion weed. So again, it has these beautiful 1 centimeter across flowers. And the function I wanted to focus in on again was protecting itself from any kind of herbivory or biotic threat, something chomping on it. And it does that through this mechanism and strategy of containing a particular oil in its foliage that can be an irritant, something that I did not know about when I gathered a whole bunch as my little wedding bouquet. So if you can see those little hair-like structures on the plant, those are called trichomes. Trichomes are basically a hair-like structure. And on the scorpion weed, those are what can excrete this oil if it's disturbed or like crunched or pressed in any way. And that can be an irritant if you're allergic to it. Apparently, even though I was holding a little bouquet of them, it didn't bother me. but it definitely can be an irritant, and you would need to use like calamine lotion and all that kind of a treatment if it was to irritate your particular skin. And the oil that's in this plant that causes that is called geranyl hydroquinone. And that is like an essential oil element that is contained within the structures of the plant. And again, it's mainly to deter it from being eaten. If you look at the fact that it's only appearing mostly like one time a year, it's got that one chance to persist, and it doesn't need to be eaten like too much of it in order to carry out the next generation, so to speak. So it's a deterrent by having that within its system. So this last part here, leaning back towards the biomimicry lens, is what I like to call a challenge to biology. In listening to all of these 6 champions of the desert, they're existing where there is periodic levels of moisture available. There's extreme UV. Maybe there's not always a good place to hide from that. There are things that want to eat you if you hold a lot of moisture, because again, the main thing is about availability and moisture in our environment. So just taking a look at that, how could their adaptations inform some of the everyday challenges that our human systems have? So I would love to hear from you all as well, any ideas that you might have. So looking first at the desert harvester ant. So that adaptation of that samophore, that hair-like structure that formed a basket, the function it was carrying out was its efficient transport. So through the lens of biomimicry, what can we learn from nature rather than what can we just take and harvest from nature? How could that inform a human design? When I think about it, I know it's very important to pay honor and respect to scale. So in transporting material, perhaps one thing I thought of is if it was, if the ratio respected and then to size, maybe that's a way to harvest grain and seed like the ants do, but without a tractor, without gasoline, without all the additional, exposed, outputs to the environment. It doesn't have to be right or wrong. It's just trying to imagine what can I learn from this particular form in nature and how it carries out this function of efficient transport. With the blister beetle, the Lyta magister, I did read online about a wart treatment, specifically for the childhood virus called mollusca. If you haven't heard of mollusca before, it's like, it looks like a boil-like structure. It's something that kids often pick up, not for any particular reason. It just kind of persists in their little world. And if you can imagine a better way to treat that, I know on my son, I want 0 blemishes on his skin, and I couldn't imagine subjecting him to a liquid nitrogen freeze treatment. Maybe that's the only choice, but in this particular case study I read in Canada, it was used, that chemical enzyme, again, the Cantharidin, as a treatment for that virus, and it had great results. It was extremely localized, a particular researched amount, and that was a way to do that. And in the biomimicry perspective, we didn't have to use all this energy to lower the temperature of the nitrogen to freezing. And I think it was a lot less invasive for the patient themselves to get that treatment. With the Kodamundi, I'm looking mainly at his snout. So if we took all the biology terms off of there, it's a flexible cylindrical design. Where else in our human-built environment could we learn from that kind of design where we need something that can flex and move in 60 degrees in all directions? Maybe an architect could expound upon that, and there could be some new design that turns out from learning from the structure of their snout, for example. Kind of similar in the Mexican vine snake, how is it that this slender creature can propel itself up into trees and on bushes? So there's this like vertical structural support design that we could learn from. Maybe that could inform the way we design an atrium, something maybe we can build it without metal, something that has that same support, but not in our usual method of constructing buildings. With the mescal buttons, I'm just highlighting the fact that there's this healing treatment, and especially that context of the community-based healing that happens in that treatment. Like, just to think of the differences where there's, a pill for everything, but in that case, it's the individual being able to be introspective and the community there to support them while they're figuring out this whole healing process. And lastly, I thought it was extremely inspiring that the scorpion weed, that particular chemical, the geranyl-quinidone, is being looked at as an anti-cancer treatment. Something right here in the desert that could treat, I read as late as 2021 primary literature about breast cancer, lung cancer, prostate cancer. And the way it does that is this very localized treatment to prevent those cells from multiplying and even creating an environment where they die, like very localized. I mean, that sounds a lot better than what I've read what patients have to be subjected to with chemotherapy. And that's just right here in the desert for us to learn from. And maybe we're not looking for anti-cancer treatment when we look at weeds, but again, it's about learning, like, what can this creature teach me? Can I quiet my human ingenuity and just let nature be that mentor and the model and the measure of a different way of constructing a solution to the challenges that we face? So I like to leave you with like a little highlight on that, just some of these key bullet points here, just to leave you with some inspiration that the whole idea here is just to learn from nature, to be connected, to know that we are part of nature, and that nature needs us as much as we need nature. And maybe the connection that you get with nature, it's going to inspire something new and wonderful, something that hasn't even been discovered yet. It's just about quieting our human genius, as I said, and allowing nature to step in. So again, those three tenets of biomimicry: model, mentor, and measure, and looking at those 6 different champions in maybe a little bit different light than you have before, understanding their natural history, those operating conditions, why does it persist the way it does, given all of the environmental context that it's subjected to. Everything has very many biological functions. I just highlighted 1 or 2 for each. And then looking at the mechanism and the strategy, the how part. How is it that these creatures carry out that very vital biological function in all of this context, and yet they're still able to carry out that needs to gather energy, protect themselves, and persist in the desert environment. So that is the end of my presentation. As always, since the beginning there, thank you so much. I do see that there are some things in the chat. I would like to make space right now if there are any questions. And in case we don't have time for everything, I do have my email address right here on the screen, rbforfreedom@gmail.com. I totally don't mind if you want to send an email. If you have a question or would like any more information, I will definitely get that to you as soon as I can.